Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today, we are going to be tackling a pretty complex topic, societal visions, and we're going to be doing it all thanks to the excerpts that you guys sent in from A Conflict of Visions by Thomas Sowell. Now, full disclosure, this book really got me thinking, and I have to say, in ways that I hadn't before.
Yeah. Sowell really has that gift, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, he can take these really complex ideas
Right.
and make them surprisingly accessible. I mean,
Yeah.
it's no wonder his work just seems to resonate with so many people.
He does. And, he starts off with this really deceptively simple concept that there are these two fundamental ways of looking at the world. And he calls them the constrained vision and the unconstrained vision. And like you were just saying, they really go so much deeper than just politics.
Yeah, it's like, they're almost like those hidden operating systems, right? That we're not even
Yeah.
aware of, but they're kind of shaping how we approach, like, pretty much everything. Like you said, from economics and law to justice, even knowledge itself.
And one of the things that really struck me was how Sowell uses these historical examples to illustrate these visions. He talks about Adam Smith and William Godwin and, Smith with his invisible hand idea. That individual self-interest can actually lead to societal good.
Yeah.
He just seems to perfectly embody that constrained vision, doesn't he?
He does. He really does. I mean, Smith, truly believed in the power of emergent order, that these complex systems can actually arise from those like decentralized actions of individuals, right? He saw human nature as inherently limited, but he also saw how those limitations, when channeled through the right institutions, could actually lead to some unintended but positive consequences.
So it's not about being pessimistic or anything. It's about recognizing those constraints and then working within them.
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, so on the other hand, we have Godwin, right?
Oh.
And Godwin is a true believer in that unconstrained vision. And he argued that human reason could intentionally create this perfectly just and happy society. I mean, talk about utopian. It's a vision that puts a lot of faith in our ability to really solve those problems through conscious design.
It really does.
But isn't there a danger in being too utopian?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, the world is messy, people are complicated, so can we really engineer our way to a perfect society?
I mean, that's such a great question. And it's one that Sowell really grapples with throughout the book. And I think you hit the nail on the head when you say that the unconstrained vision, while it can be super inspiring, can sometimes lead to some unrealistic expectations. And then solutions that just don't fully account for, the complexity of human nature in those social systems.
So let's break this down a little bit further for our listener. What are the core tenets of each of these visions?
Okay, so in a nutshell, right? The constrained vision sees human nature as inherently flawed. We have limited knowledge, limited reason, and limited virtue. And that leads to this emphasis on trade-offs, on kind of accepting that we can't really solve every problem perfectly.
Beauty's about pragmatism and working within the bounds of reality.
Exactly. The constrained vision also sees those evolved social institutions like markets, families, legal traditions as crucial, because they embody that accumulated wisdom of generations. I mean, they're not perfect, but they've stood the test of time for a reason. Right.
Right. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. So what about the unconstrained vision? What are its core beliefs?
Okay, well, the unconstrained vision sees human potential as vast and improvable. It emphasizes those solutions over trade-offs, believing that with enough reason and knowledge, we can overcome most obstacles and really engineer a better society.
So it's a much more optimistic view of what humans are capable of. But doesn't that also kind of run the risk of oversimplifying things? Sometimes isn't the best solution a compromise rather than a perfect solution?
Absolutely. I mean, the unconstrained vision can definitely sometimes be blind to those unintended consequences of its grand schemes. Like you were saying, it can underestimate the complexity of those social systems and the stubborn persistence of human fallibility.
All of this is so fascinating, but I think it's still a bit abstract. So can you give us some concrete examples of how these visions actually clash in the real world?
Sure. Let's take economics, for example.
Okay.
One of Sowell's most compelling examples is his critique of Thorstein Veblen. Now, Veblen actually believed that engineers should be in charge of the economy. Talk about an unconstrained vision.
Wow.
Yeah. He thought that engineers with all their technical expertise could manage things far more efficiently than the invisible hand of the market.
And I can see where Sal is coming from. I mean, even with the best intentions, trying to centrally plan a complex system like an economy, it's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It is. The constrained vision recognizes the importance of dispersed knowledge. That's the idea that knowledge is widely distributed throughout society, and no single person or group can grasp it all. Markets with their price signals and decentralized decision-making really tap into that dispersed knowledge in a way that central planning never could.
Okay, so we've got economics. What about other areas? Does Sowell apply these visions to, like, law and justice, too?
He does. In law, for example, you see the constrained vision reflected in the principle of judicial restraint. This is the idea that judges should interpret laws narrowly, sticking closely to the text and intent of those lawmakers. It's a recognition of the limits of judicial authority and the importance of respecting that democratic process.
So it's about judges, knowing their place and not trying to legislate from the bench.
Exactly. Now, the unconstrained vision, on the other hand, tends to favor judicial activism. The idea that judges should be more willing to go beyond the letter of the law to achieve what they see as a just outcome. It's a more expansive view of judicial power, often driven by a belief that judges can and should be agents of social change.
But isn't there a danger in that, if judges start interpreting laws too broadly, aren't they essentially usurping the role of the legislature?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern. And it's one that Sowell raises. He argues that judicial activism can undermine the rule of law and create uncertainty. As people can no longer be sure what the law actually means, it can also politicize the judiciary as judges are seen as imposing their own values rather than impartially applying the law.
Okay, so we've got economics, we've got law. What about justice itself? How do these visions play out in that realm?
When it comes to justice, the unconstrained vision often emphasizes social justice, the idea that society should be structured in a way that ensures a fair distribution of wealth opportunities and outcomes. It's a vision that focuses on achieving specific results, often through government intervention and redistribution.
So it's about equality of outcome, making sure everyone ends up with roughly the same slice of the pie.
Right. The constrained vision, on the other hand, tends to emphasize procedural justice. The idea that justice is about following fair procedures and applying laws impartially, regardless of the outcome. It's a vision that focuses on the process rather than the results, believing that fair processes will ultimately lead to a more just society, even if perfect equality is never achieved.
I'm starting to see how these visions really permeate every aspect of our thinking about society. It's like they're two completely different lenses through which we view the world.
That's a great analogy. And, one of the things Sowell does so brilliantly is help us recognize those lenses and then understand how they shape our perceptions and our arguments. It's a powerful tool for navigating the complexities of the world around us.
This has been so insightful, but I have to ask, do we all fall neatly into one vision or the other? And can our visions, evolve over time?
Well, that's a question we'll explore further in our next segment.
So we've established that these two visions, constrained and unconstrained, are kind of like these fundamental frameworks for understanding the world. But are we stuck with the one we've got? Can our visions change?
That's where Sowell's analysis gets really, really fascinating. He argues that visions can actually evolve and change, both within individuals and societies as a whole.
Okay.
Think about it. We're constantly bombarded with new information, new experiences, even just life happening.
Right.
And all of these things can kind of subtly or sometimes dramatically reshape our views.
Oh, I know. I've had those moments where, a book or an event just completely shifted my perspective on something. It's like suddenly you see the world through a different lens.
That's exactly it. And Sowell even used the example of people converting to and from Marxism, especially during times of major social or economic upheaval.
Okay.
Imagine living through something like the Great Depression.
Right.
Suddenly those Marxist critiques of capitalism might start to resonate a lot more, right?
Yeah. Or conversely, witnessing the horrors of Stalinism firsthand might make you rethink your, faith in revolutionary solutions. It's like reality has a way of intruding on even our most deeply held beliefs.
Exactly. And even without those kinds of dramatic shifts, our visions can kind of evolve more gradually as we accumulate life experience, have conversations like this one, encounter new ideas.
Right.
It's the beauty of being a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
We should never be afraid to question our assumptions or to update our mental models as we go.
It makes me think about my own journey and how my views on certain issues have definitely shifted over time. It's encouraging to know that our visions aren't set in stone.
No, they're not.
Yeah.
And this concept of evolving visions ties in beautifully with another key idea from Sowell, that social systems are often more like evolved orders than design systems. And he uses this analogy to language, which I find incredibly insightful.
Oh, I like where this is going. Explain that one for our listeners.
Okay, so think about how complex and nuanced language is.
Yeah.
Yet no single person sat down and designed it. It emerged over centuries through this process of trial and error adaptation, constant refinement. We inherit this incredibly sophisticated system that we could never have consciously created on our own.
It's like we're all swimming in this sea of language, taking it for granted, but it's actually this marvel of emergent order.
Exactly. And Sowell argues that many social systems work the same way.
Okay.
Take markets, for example. No single person or group designed the global economy. It emerged from the countless interactions of individuals pursuing their own interests, guided by things like prices, competition, supply, and demand.
So it's like the spontaneous order that arises from the bottom up, rather than being imposed from the top down. It's almost counterintuitive when you think about it.
It is. And Sowell argues that this kind of evolved order is often more effective and resilient than systems designed by even the most brilliant minds.
Okay.
Why? Because it taps into that dispersed knowledge and experience of countless individuals over time. And it's constantly adapting to changing circumstances in a way that no central planner ever could.
So this is a pretty radical idea when you think about it. It challenges this whole notion that we need experts or central planners to solve our problems.
It does. It does. And it fits perfectly within that constrained vision of human capabilities. It's a powerful reminder of the limits of our knowledge and the importance of humility when it comes to social engineering.
Yeah, I can see how this idea would be at odds with the unconstrained vision's tendency to see social problems as engineering problems that can be solved through rational planning and expertise.
Absolutely. Sowell contrasts the idea of evolved order with that unconstrained view that if we just get the right experts, the right data, the right plan, we can design our way to a perfect society.
Right.
He even uses the example of Veblen again, who, as we discussed, believe engineers should run the economy.
It's like that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you see the world through an engineering lens, every problem starts to look like an engineering problem.
But Sowell argues that this kind of thinking ignores the complexity of social systems, the interconnectedness of things, those unintended consequences that can ripple out from even the best-intentioned plans. It's like trying to design a language from scratch. You might end up with something that looks logical on paper, but it won't have the richness, the flexibility and adaptability of a language that's evolved organically.
Okay, I'm getting how this concept of evolved order plays out. Now, I'm curious to dig deeper into one of the biggest flashpoints between these two visions, equality. How do they view this concept so differently?
Well, in the unconstrained vision, equality is often seen as equality of outcome.
Okay.
It's about ensuring that everyone ends up with roughly the same level of wealth, income, and social standing. The idea is to level the playing field and make sure everyone has an equal share of the pie, even if it requires significant intervention to get there.
So it's about redistributing resources, implementing policies like affirmative action, all in the service of achieving that equal outcome.
Exactly. It stems from that belief that we can and should use social policy to engineer a more equal society, even if it means treating some people differently than others to get there.
Yeah, I can see how that aligns with the unconstrained vision's faith in the power of human reason to design solutions. But what about the constrained vision? How does it approach equality?
The constrained vision takes a very different approach, focusing on equality of process.
Okay.
This means ensuring that everyone has the same opportunities and is judged by the same standards regardless of their background or social group. It's about fair rules of the game, not about guaranteeing equal outcomes.
So it's less about the end result and more about ensuring a level playing field from the start.
Precisely. The thinking is that you can't fully control social outcomes, that individual effort, talent, and even luck play a huge role. Trying to engineer specific outcomes, they argue, can backfire, create perverse incentives, and even undermine personal responsibility.
I'm starting to see how these different conceptions of equality can lead to very different policy approaches. It's not just an abstract philosophical debate, it has real-world implications.
Absolutely. Now, another area where these visions clash is in their understanding of power. And this goes deeper than the usual who has the most money or influence kind of thinking.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How does Sowell unpack the concept of power through these two lenses?
Well, in the unconstrained vision, power is often seen as the ability to produce specific results, to impose your will on others.
Okay.
It's about who's calling the shots and who benefits from the way things are. Take, for example, Myrtle's view that Western nations have exploited the resources and peoples of the Third World.
Right.
That's a classic example of the unconstrained view of power.
It's about identifying those who hold power and then using that power to reshape society in a more just way.
Exactly. But the constrained vision takes a more nuanced, almost counterintuitive view. It sees power more in terms of the ability to restrict choices, to limit the options available to others.
Wait, so it's not just about who's wielding power directly, but also about how rules, institutions, even cultural norms can constrain people's choices, even if that's not the explicit intention.
You got it. And Sowell uses the work of Peter Bauer, an economist who studied development, to illustrate this.
Okay.
Bauer argued that the real obstacles to development were often internal corrupt governments, stifling regulations and cultural norms that discouraged entrepreneurship. He saw those things as concentrating power in the hands of elites and limiting the choices available to ordinary people.
It's a really interesting way of thinking about power, not just as something to be seized, but as something to be dispersed and limited, even if it's in the name of a good cause.
Right. And it highlights how even well-intentioned interventions can have unintended consequences if they concentrate power in the hands of a few, or if they limit the freedom of individuals to make their own choices.
Okay, so we've got equality and power. What about those age-old human problems, war and crime? How do these visions explain those?
Well, the unconstrained vision often sees war and crime as products of misunderstanding poverty or social injustice.
Okay.
The idea is that if we just eliminate those root causes, war and crime will largely disappear.
It's a hopeful view, right? One that sees these problems as solvable through education, diplomacy, social reform, all those things that expand our understanding and create a more just world.
Exactly.
Right.
But the constrained vision, while acknowledging the role of social factors, takes more pragmatic, some might say sobering view.
Okay.
It sees war and crime as arising, at least in part, from something more fundamental, the darker side of human nature.
Yeah.
Our inherent selfishness, aggression, capacity for violence.
Right.
These things exist, and to ignore them is to be naive about the challenges we face.
So it's not about denying the importance of addressing social ills, but about recognizing that there are limits to what we can achieve through social engineering alone. Human nature is a factor we can't simply reason away.
Right. And this leads to very different policy prescriptions. The unconstrained vision often favors approaches that focus on rehabilitation, understanding, and addressing root causes. Think of things like restorative justice, poverty reduction programs, conflict resolution initiatives.
So it's about getting to the heart of the matter and transforming individuals and societies from the inside out.
Exactly. The constrained vision, however, emphasizes deterrence, containment, and punishment. It's about establishing clear consequences for bad behavior and maintaining a strong capacity for law enforcement and national defense.
So it's not about being soft on crime or naive about the threats in the world. It's about taking a realistic view of human nature and finding practical ways to manage those risks.
Precisely. And this brings us to what might be the most fundamental difference between these two visions, how they understand the nature of knowledge itself.
Okay, this is where things get really meta. Let's dive into that one.
Okay, so in the unconstrained vision articulated reason, expert knowledge, the power of the intellect. Those are paramount. It's about having the right knowledge, the right theories, the right experts to solve social problems. The faith is in the power of human reason to figure things out.
It's like that saying, leave it to the smart people, they'll figure it out.
You got it.
Yeah.
But the constrained vision takes a more humble, some might say skeptical view. It recognizes the limits of individual reason and the danger of putting too much faith in experts, no matter how brilliant they may seem.
So if the unconstrained vision is all about top-down knowledge, what does the constrained vision emphasize?
Sowell talks about something he calls dispersed knowledge. The accumulated wisdom and experience of countless individuals over time, often embodied in things like tradition, custom-evolved social institutions. It's the kind of knowledge that isn't always easily articulated or captured in textbooks. It's embedded in the way things work and the practices that have stood the test of time.
It's like we're surrounded by this vast reservoir of knowledge, but it's not always obvious or readily accessible to the conscious mind.
Exactly. And the constrained vision argues that we ignore this dispersed knowledge at our peril. We should be wary of grand schemes of utopian visions that try to remake the world from scratch. We should be more attentive to that often unarticulated wisdom embedded in the way things already work.
It's a reminder that we don't always have all the answers, and that sometimes the best solutions have already been discovered through generations of trial and error. It's about humility and respect for the complexity of the world.
Well said. And this brings us to a crucial question.
Oh.
What does all of this mean for you, the listener? How can understanding these visions help you navigate the complexities of the world around us?
That's the question we all want answered. Let's get practical.
Yeah.
How does this apply to our lives? Okay, so let's bring this home for our listener. We've explored these two visions, constrained and unconstrained, and we've seen how they kind of clash in everything from economics and justice to, even the very nature of knowledge itself. But how does all of this high-level thinking actually apply to our everyday lives? What's the takeaway here for our listener?
Well, think of it this way. Understanding these visions, it's kind of like having X-ray vision for arguments. You suddenly see past all the surface rhetoric and those heated debates,
Right.
and you start to see those underlying assumptions that are really driving people's beliefs and their positions.
It's like that aha moment when you realize that people aren't just disagreeing about like specific policies. They're actually operating from completely different worldviews. And it's no wonder we talk past each other so often.
It is.
Oh,
And
yeah.
once you grasp that, even if you still disagree, you can at least have more productive conversations. You can start by acknowledging those fundamental differences and genuinely trying to understand where the other person is coming from.
So it's not about trying to convert everyone to your own vision. It's about bringing more empathy and understanding to our interactions, especially in a world that feels increasingly polarized. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, sometimes recognizing that clash of visions can help you avoid those unproductive debates altogether.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's genuinely better to just agree to disagree and move on.
Yeah, knowing when to walk away is a skill in itself, especially online.
It is.
But okay, beyond like better conversations, what else does this knowledge equip us to do?
Well, one big takeaway is learning to appreciate those trade-offs that are inherent in any social system.
Mm.
There's no such thing as a free lunch. Every decision has costs and benefits. And understanding those trade-offs through the lens of these visions can help you make more informed choices, both personally and as a citizen engaging in the political process.
It's about being more realistic about what's actually achievable and being aware of those potential downsides, those unintended consequences of even the most well-intentioned policies.
Right, and then building on that, understanding these visions can help you think more critically about all those policy proposals that are being thrown around.
Hmm.
You know, what their likely consequences might be.
So instead of just reacting emotionally to headlines or sound bites, you start asking those deeper questions like, okay, is this proposal based on like a realistic view of human nature? Does it account for those trade-offs? Is it likely to concentrate power or does it actually expand individual freedom?
Exactly. Those are the questions that can help cut through the noise and help you form your own more informed judgments. You become a more engaged, thoughtful citizen, not just reacting, but analyzing.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground today, from Adam Smith to William Godwin, from free markets to social justice, and even the evolution of thought itself. It's a lot to process, but I have to say, I'm already starting to see the world a bit differently. Noticing those underlying visions at play everywhere. Any final words of wisdom for our listener before we wrap up?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have these underlying visions that shape how we see the world, even if we're not consciously aware of them. And understanding those visions, both our own and those of others, is crucial for navigating the complexities of modern life. It's about becoming more self-aware, more empathetic, and ultimately more thoughtful in our approach to the world around us.
Beautifully put. And as always, we want to leave our listener with something to ponder. A question that kind of extends beyond what we've explicitly covered today. So here it is. Could it be that both visions, constrained and unconstrained, are necessary for a healthy society? Maybe the tension between them, that push and pull between, the urge to solve problems and the recognition of limits, that actually drives progress and keeps us from going too far in either direction. What do you think?
I think that's a fantastic question to leave our listeners with food for thought indeed.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Thomas Sowell's A Conflict of Visions. We hope you've gained some new insights and maybe even shifted your perspective a bit. Remember, the journey of learning is never truly over, so keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those conversations going. Until next time, happy diving!